Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, specifically in your Linux journey. So in last video, we talked a little bit about commands. We broke those commands up into the three parts that make up the command. We learned about that. We actually took some examples, did it on the whiteboard, and then we also did it in the terminal. So it was a really cool thing that you got to see both the theory side of things and you got the practical know-how, meaning you actually got to practice it. A lot of times you just get the theory and people don't really actually practice. So it's always good to reinforce your learning by actually doing the thing in the terminal. So make sure you're doing that. Now, in today's video, we're going to continue building our knowledge and we're going to touch on a couple of different items. So some of the items we're going to learn in this video is tab completion. What is tab completion and how do we use that? We're going to touch a little bit on the command history, understand what that is and why that's important. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with command editing shortcuts. All things that you're going to do as you continue your Linux journey. Now, remember, it's very important that you look at the description. There's valuable information in the description, meaning if some of the topics that we're talking about doesn't make sense to you, or maybe your environment is not set up and you don't know how to do it in order to get to the point where you can start practicing the commands and learning about the operating system. Again, those links are in the description so that way you can catch up. Also in the description is a link to the playlist. In the playlist, you'll find the order of the videos in which you need to follow to make sure that you're caught up. So again, check out those links, make sure you're caught up so that way you can follow along in today's video. But before we jump into today's content, make sure you go ahead and give me a like for the video if the content is helping you out. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any new videos that we post to the channel. And lastly, share the video with a family member or friend so that way you can inspire them in their tech journey. Or maybe they're already on their tech journey and don't know about Linux and want to learn about it. Go ahead and share the video with them so that way they also have the knowledge as well. So with housekeeping out of the way, let's jump now into the desktop so that way we can learn all about tab completion, command history, and finally wrapping it up with command editing shortcuts. Let's head over. All right, so here we are on the desktop. We have our RHEL system. Let's go ahead and log in. So here's our RHEL 8 desktop. And by now, you should know where the terminal is. So I'm going to just go ahead and launch the terminal. Let's go ahead and make this bigger so that way you guys can read it. If you're curious on how I made things bigger, Control, Shift, and plus are the keys to hit. And how did I figure that out? We just go under the View menu, and you see here over by Zoom In, you have Control++. So that's how I knew how to make the terminal bigger. So let's talk a little bit about tab completion. What is tab completion? So tab completion is a nice little feature that's built into the command line. And as you probably guessed by now, it allows you to complete your commands as you're typing in the command line. So this is very useful in cases where you're trying to save time on actually typing commands. You can use tab in order to complete the command. One of my other favorite applications for using this is if sometimes you are unsure if the command you're using is correct, you can use tab completion in order to figure out if that is the proper command. And if it does complete it, then you know you're on the right track. And I'll show you an example of that. So let's take a look at what an example could be of tab completion. Now, if you recall in our previous video, we used the touch command in order to be able to create a file. As an example, we can type in TOU, and then we can use tab in order to complete the command. So let's go ahead and press that. And as you can see, it actually completed the command. And this is an example of how we can use tab in order to help us complete a command and save us time by typing that command in the command line. Now, just a second ago, I talked about how you can use tab completion to help you out in case you don't know what commands you're looking for. I actually use tab completion in order to help me out with some of these commands to see if I'm on the right track. Let's look at an example of how I use tab completion in order to assist me with the commands. Let's say, for example, that I know that there's a command that will create the file for me, but I don't really recall the entire command itself. Maybe I only remembered one or two characters. So back to the touch command, let's say it's rolling in my head that there's a command that has a T and an O, but I don't know the entire command. This is where tab completion can help you in order to figure out what that command is. So I'm going to type in the command line TO, and now we can press tab for tab completion. And by the way, that tab was pressed twice. And as you can see, I have toe, I have top, and a couple of other ones, of course. but all the way to the end is the touch command. If you may be wondering, you're saying, okay, well, if you don't remember the command, but you know it starts with a TO, you can use process of elimination and then combine previous knowledge in order to help you figure out what you need. So as an example, when we talked about the touch command, now that I know that one of these commands actually creates a file for me, and we learned in the previous video that the touch command actually updates the timestamps. And if we don't have the file, the touch command actually creates the file and then updates the timestamps. So that information that I just gave out to you, you can utilize the man pages in order to figure out which one of these commands will actually do what I just told you. In a sense, it's process of elimination using tab completion. So let's go to the beginning of the command line, and I'm going to press the home key on my keyboard in order to bring me to the beginning. And I'm going to type in man, space. We can do process of elimination in order to figure out which one of these commands allows us to update the timestamps of a file. And remember, if the file doesn't exist, it creates one. So as an example, let's type in TO, see what TO gets us. And as you can see in this example, TO stands for a table of term info entries. And if you read the description, you can see here that it's not exactly what we're looking for. So let's press Q in order to quit out of this. Let's try it again. This time we actually know the right answer, which is touch. So let's type in man space touch. And as you can see here, change file timestamps. As you read the man page for touch and you read the description, you realize that the touch command actually updates the file's timestamps and creates the file if it doesn't exist. So let's press Q to quit out of this. Now let's look at another example when it comes to tab completion. So I'm going to use the ls command to show you what's on my home directory. And here's a great example of where you can use tab completion in order to help you type a little bit faster. Now, let's say, for example, I'm looking to view a little bit more detailed information about a specific file that I have in my home directory. Well, as you see in my home directory, I have that RHEL-8.7 ISO, and I want to see a little bit more information on that. Do you really want to go ahead and start typing out that whole thing? This is where tab completion can help you. So I'm going to use the ls command. So ls space, I'm going to give it some options. And the option is going to be the -L in order for long list. And then I'm going to also give it the H option as well. And if you're reading the man page, you'll know that's human readable. And now I'm going to give it the argument, which we talked about in the previous video, which is the RHEL-8.7, that whole string there. This is where we do space RH in order to start typing the actual string. And then we use tab in order to complete the string, which means that I don't have to sit there and type all those characters one by one. So let's hit enter on that. And you can see once we hit enter that we get detailed information about this particular file, which is a RHEL ISO file. And by the way, when I'm referring to a string, all a string is a number of characters put together. So as an example, when we're looking at the screen here, pictures is considered a string, public is considered a string, videos is another string. And when I say characters, let's look at video, which is a string. V is considered a character, I is a character, D is a character, E is a character, so on and so forth, right? So that is the distinction between what a character is and what a string is. So when I use these terms, make sure you're aware of what that means. So if you were counting, we looked at 3 different examples of how tab completion can really help us when we're working with Linux. So now at this point, we looked at tab completion and some of the cool things that we can do with tab completion. Let's move on to command history, and we'll take a look at exactly what you can get with command history. As you go on in your Linux journey and you're typing in the commands and you're working with the terminal, you start to build up a list of all the commands that you type in the terminal. And this is where command history comes into place. You can actually go into the history and see what you've previously typed. So let's go into the terminal now and type in history to view what our previous commands are. And I'll go into some of the really cool things that you can do with the history in order to speed up how you interface with the command line. So let's go ahead and go to the terminal. Don't forget to use that tab completion. And let's go ahead and hit enter on that. And let's go ahead and make this bigger so we can see more lines on the screen. And as you can see here, here's a list of the commands that I've typed in previously. Some of the things that you're seeing on the screen are commands that we haven't even touched on yet, but this gives you a great example of how you're able to access previous commands all by using the history command. Now, you might say to yourself, okay, cool, I see a list of commands here. Why would this be useful? So let's say as an example, you have a complex command that you actually worked on. Well, did you know you can actually use a history to rerun commands? Instead of me typing in the ls command, and again, this would be a basic example for what we're doing, but this really works out well in complex commands where they're long. Let's run line number 302, so 302, which is the ls command. And we do that by actually typing in exclamation point, and then we type in the line number. So for example, the ls command here would be 302. And then we hit enter on that, and you can see that it actually pulls up the ls command from our history. Let's take a look at one more example. Instead of typing ls space dash lh space rel dash 8.7, and then of course the rest of the string, which is that really long command that you see on line 303 there, we can again do exclamation 303 to rerun that command, and it will actually type in the whole thing and execute it for us, as you're seeing on the screen here. So it's a really cool way of using the history in order to see what commands you've typed in the past to either A, remind yourself of what you've done, the work, or if you want to save yourself some time in order to be able to type all this stuff over again, this is a really cool way in order to use the history to rerun your commands. Now, one more trick that I'll show you with the history command that you can actually use, and of course, there's other options you can use, but I'll leave that up to you in order to explore and go figure out what the other options are. But one more option that you can use in order to rerun a command, let's say I type in ls. Now that I've typed in the ls command is the last command in my history. I can actually do exclamation point again, and it will rerun the ls command. So as you see, it ran the last command, which was the ls command. So that's another cool example of how you can use the history in order to rerun commands to make your experience a lot quicker when it comes to working with the command line. So we learned about tab completion and what you can use that for. We also touched on the command history and some of the cool little features you can use within command history. Now, remember, I didn't go over all the cool little things that you can do with command history. So go ahead and play around with it, learn a little bit more about the command history and what other feature it has to offer. But now we'll go into the last part, which is learning about command editing shortcuts. So let's jump into that and see what that looks like. As you go through your journey of learning Linux and you're working with the terminal, you're inputting your commands, sometimes the commands will get very long and you may need to learn some additional shortcuts to help you with inputting commands or changing commands. And so we're going to show you some shortcuts in order to be a little bit more effective using the terminal. Now for our first shortcut, it's going to be Control A. And what does Control A do? Control A jumps to the beginning of the command line. So up on our screen here is what's supposed to be the move command with the -V option. Now keep in mind that the move command won't work here because we're missing that M. This is where Control A comes into play. So if we hit Control A, you can see that the cursor goes to the beginning of the command line and we can put in the M in order to help us make those adjustments even quicker. Pretty cool. Now what happens if we want to go to the end of the command line? What's the shortcut for that? Control E will bring you to the end of the command line in case that you want to adjust something towards the end. Now let's move on to our next shortcut. And our next shortcut is the Control U. And so what does the Control U shortcut do? That actually clears from the cursor to the beginning of the command line. So as you can see here from our previous example, if we are at the end of the command line and we clear all the way to the beginning, so that actually removes the entire command. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So with that simple command, we save time from having to press the backspace all the way to the end to get rid of the entire command. Pretty cool. Instead of clearing from the end to the beginning, how do we clear from the beginning of the cursor to the actual end of the command line? So as an example here, I know for a fact that this command is going to fail. And why is it going to fail? Well, that's because we're telling the computer to rename the file, and the specific file, the first file that we're given it is test1, and we want to rename it to test2. Problem is, test1 does not exist. We already ran the command previously, and now the file is actually called test2. So if I run it, you'll see the error. And of course, it's saying that no file exists.
So let's go back to this and we need to adjust it. And how we do that, we can use the Control K by putting the cursor right after the V, run the Control K so it removes that portion that is incorrect. And we can go ahead and put in test 2. And let's say we want to rename it to test 3. And as you can see here, now with an ls, we renamed our file from test2 to test3, but more importantly, we used the shortcut Control K to go and clear from beginning of the cursor, which was right after the V, all the way to the end of the command line. So it allows you to save time on the keyboard of having to remove that whole entire portion. So that's pretty cool. So our next shortcut is jumping between previous word on the command line. So as you see here, our cursor is all the way at the end of the command line. And if we use Control left arrow, you can see that our cursor moves from previous word on the command line. So as an example here, what if I want to name this capital T instead of lowercase t for test? Now test 2 doesn't exist, so let's go ahead and use our shortcut in order to get to the beginning of the previous word, which was test 2, which is our next option. So we're going to go ahead and hit Control and left arrow, and that brings us to the beginning of the previous word, which we had just adjusted. But let's do it one more time and see what you get. And as you can see here, we got to the previous word now, which is test 2. So let's rename that now to test 3. And how we rename it to test 3 is our next shortcut, which is Control right arrow. And Control right arrow brings us to the end of the next word. So as you can see here, it brought us towards the end. We can backspace and put a 3 here. And as we break down this command now, the new file that we created previously, we called it test 3, and you can see that with our previous ls command. We're going to rename it using the move command, and we're going to give it the option -V in order to be verbose. And now we're going to name it test3, but with a capital T. And we're going to put that file, of course, in our home directory, as you see here. So let's run that command. And as you see, it renamed the file. So now let's go ahead and do an ls. The file was renamed to test3, but with a capital T now. So you just saw an example of how you can utilize Control left arrow and Control right arrow in order to quickly make adjustments to your commands. Let's look at one last shortcut, and the last shortcut is Control R. And Control R allows you to search the history list of commands for a pattern. So let's say, for example, I typed in a move command, but I wasn't sure of what that entire move command was. So one of the shortcuts you can use is the Control R, and you get this option here that says reverse-I-search. And one of the things that we can do is let's type in move, and you can see that it's actually searching your history based on the move command that you've used. And let's say this was the actual move command that I wanted to use. You would go ahead and just hit enter in order to redo that command that you had in your search history. But of course, we're going to get an error here because lowercase test3 file does not exist in our directory, so never would have found it anyways.
So that'll do it for today's content. You certainly learned a lot today on the command line. We touched a little bit about tab completion, how you can use it in order to help you out. We also touched on command history, how to look up what you've typed in the past, how to use some commands in order to make sure that you can utilize the history to retype your commands and make typing on the command line a little bit faster. And lastly, we touched on those command editing shortcuts. Those shortcuts will help you work very quickly on the command line and even make you look like a wizard in front of your friends. So go ahead and practice what you learned today. Make sure you also check out the links in the description. Don't forget as well that we're also working on an environment that you guys can log into and be able to practice your skills. So stay tuned for that. I'll put a link in the description once that's ready to launch for you. Lastly, if the content is helping you out and you're enjoying it, make sure you go ahead and give me a like for the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so that way you're notified whenever we upload videos to the channel. And don't forget to share it with a family member or friend. You want to possibly inspire somebody to start their tech journey, or if they're in tech already, maybe they haven't worked with Linux, and this is a great skill to add to their tool set. If you have any additional questions, leave me a comment in the comments below. I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. And I look forward to seeing everybody in the next video as we continue our Linux journey.